Welcome back, everybody, to another breaking news edition of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. We got the whole crew with us, Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, on this Wednesday afternoon. And we've got a quarterback to talk about, fellas. Four-star quarterback Ryan Montgomery has committed to Georgia. Finley, Ohio native picked the Bulldogs over Florida and South Carolina. And it seems like the conversation, the big topic around the 2025 class has been settled. Georgia has finally got its quarterback in this class. A lot to talk about on the Ryan Montgomery front, and we're also going to talk about G-Day and some of the transfer portal talk as well later on in this episode. But, Ben, let's just jump right into it. Ryan Montgomery is a dog. We got to see the video of him committing on 24/7 Sports. Brought out the Bulldog to really make it a special commitment. From what you got to see, Ben, how did this recruitment play out? What was it that put Georgia on top and led to Ryan picking Bulldogs?
Well, for starters, I don't want to go off script too much, but I do want to apologize for Jordan's audio there, and I'll go on a monologue here shortly so that, Jordan, you can try and fix that just because there was some static going on there. But as he said so eloquently beyond the static was that Ryan Montgomery committed to Georgia, and that's huge news for the recruiting class. We actually talked about a few episodes ago, with Matt Zollers committing to Missouri, what does it mean for Georgia's recruiting class? And, Ryan Montgomery was a name. I think, Jordan, you said that's who you thought Georgia would end up landing in this class. There was also Julian Lewis. And I think that there was sort of some decision going on after the Zollers commitment of, on Georgia's side, who do they turn to at quarterback? On the Montgomery's side, how, which schools should we really consider as strongly as we are as we get into really the crunch time of the recruiting process? And he was scheduled to go on an official visit to South Carolina this upcoming weekend. And he got that green light from Georgia over the weekend saying, hey, we want you. You're the quarterback we would love for you to go with. If you want to commit to Georgia, now is the time and you are open to do so. And he did not hesitate. I mean, if you talk to Ryan Montgomery 18 months ago, I've only talked to him probably for about the last 12 months. But if you talked to him 18 months ago, I think Georgia's name would have been mentioned. Once he started to get a relationship with Mike Bobo last summer, Georgia was getting mentioned with Michigan as really the two that he thought had elevated themselves to the top. As he got into the fall, that might have quieted down a little bit for a variety of reasons. I mean, Dylan Raiola, Ryan Puglisi, both being committed in the 2024 class. Georgia didn't necessarily know that they were going to take a 2025 quarterback at all times. And that was a communication that was ongoing between the Montgomery family and Georgia really throughout the entire recruiting process. And I think, once Raiola flipped to Nebraska, it opened a spot for all the 2025 quarterbacks to say, all right, Georgia's going to take a 2025 quarterback, and who is it going to be? And Ryan Montgomery was consistently one of the three names that we always mentioned as a possibility to land in Georgia's class. And I think I really go back to the January visit that he took. He had a lot of questions for Georgia. Mike Bobo and Montgomery Van Gorder had done a good job with maintaining that relationship, but it had not always been clear to Ryan where he stood on Georgia's board, where his priority level was. And he's, been clear and honest about that throughout the process. And I think it was on that visit that he came in with a lot of questions. And if you talk to any of his high school coaches, apparently Ryan is just a big questions guy. He wants to know everything. He's very curious. He has a really high intellect, football IQ. And I think that he approached that January interaction with Mike Bobo and Montgomery Van Gorder exactly like that, and Kirby Smart obviously as well, saying, I need these things clarified to know whether I can continue moving forward with Georgia and my recruitment. And he left that visit with that being a resounding, yes, I'm still very interested in Georgia, and I know that they really, really like me as well. I think it was when he came back for spring practice in March that he really communicated to Georgia, like, this is where I want to be. I'm not committing. I know that there's other factors and there's quarterback dominoes and a lot of things that go into all of this, that this can't necessarily just happen overnight. But I think that he wanted to make very clear to Georgia that Georgia was the place that he wanted to be. And once that option was finally available for him and Georgia said, you're the guy that we want to go with in the 2025 class, he let South Carolina know, hey, I'm sorry, I'm probably not going to be coming on that official visit this weekend. He let Florida know, hey, I'm not going to be coming on that official visit this summer. And he let Georgia know, hey, I'm going to be in the class and I'm going to move my official visit up to that May 31st to June 2nd weekend so that I can help recruit the rest of the class, because as we've said time and time again, that's really going to be the priority visit weekend for Georgia. And so, yeah, it's really a fascinating trajectory that Georgia's 2025 quarterback recruiting has gone on throughout the entire process. And, if you'd asked me at the end of the summer last year, what quarterback would Georgia have in the 2025 class, I think I would have said either Ryan Montgomery or nobody, because Julian Lewis had just committed to USC. There weren't any other clear options, and it wasn't certain yet that Georgia was going to take a 2025 quarterback, but he was the consistent name really from start to finish. And I think when all was said and done, just the way that he's wired, he fits what Georgia likes to do. He fits who Georgia is. And, for the second cycle in a row, Georgia's taken a Ryan at quarterback.
Very important analysis there, Ben, with the Ryan update. 6'3", 215. He was a finalist for Mr. Football in Ohio this past season. And before we talk a little bit more specifically about him, Ben, can you tell us a little bit about his relationship with a former NFL quarterback that I saw was mentioned, just talking about as he has been coming up?
Yeah, well, he's a big Pittsburgh Steelers fan, and he went to the same high school as Ben Roethlisberger went to in Ohio, and they've definitely had a relationship throughout the process. When you become Finley's starting quarterback, there are big shoes to fill. Everybody knows that Ben Roethlisberger, in that area, it's one of those small town football towns that they love football, and everybody knows that Ben Roethlisberger was the quarterback there. And for Ryan Montgomery to step in as a freshman quarterback when they had a really veteran team and that quarterback that had established himself, the quarterback at the time when Ryan became a freshman said, real quick, I'm pivoting to play wide receiver, and he became Ryan's leading receiver that year. And I think for him to sort of step into that role as a freshman shows you the type of guy that he is. And I think that having that background with Ben Roethlisberger probably doesn't hurt. Having someone that he can kind of lean on and say, look, you've been here, you've done it at this exact place. What's it like? But yeah, he's a big Steelers fan as well. And I know our guy, Alan True, who did a really great job covering Ryan's recruitment, before the ceremony, they were sort of going back and forth with some terrible towels, giving each other some, fun fodder on Pittsburgh Steelers stories as well. So I'm sure Ben Roethlisberger is a Georgia Bulldog today.
Yeah, I'd have to imagine there are plenty of Georgia fans that are A-okay with him being a Steelers fan. There's been a lot of good Georgia players that have played there. A lot of them there right now. Ben, what can you tell us about Ryan Montgomery's game? What, if you've gotten to watch him at all, stands out about the way he plays the position and what he's going to be bringing to Georgia?
Well, the first thing that stands out to me when I watch Ryan Montgomery's film is just the type of offense that they run at their school. They run a lot of empty, meaning they don't have anybody back there protecting him. Their preferred approach is 5 wide. Ryan's back there by himself. He's checking protections. He's reading coverages because of the nature of what they do. As his head coach and offensive coordinator told me when I spoke with them yesterday, they see a lot of different coverages because people try and get creative with what they do. And so Ryan Montgomery has seen a lot at the high school level, more than most guys have probably seen at the high school level. And quite frankly, he's probably asked to do a little bit more. And there's more of an onus placed on him and their offense than there is with a lot of high school quarterbacks, just because that's what they ask him to do at Finley. And so I think Kirby Smart's talked a lot about how quarterback-centric Georgia's offense is and how important it is for everything to run through the quarterback and the mastery of the offense that's required to be successful. And I think ultimately that's the reason why Ryan Montgomery is in Georgia's class right now instead of some other guys. And I think that when you ask his coaches, like, tell me some things about him, they're going to bring up the arm talent. They're going to bring up the ability for him to be able to make layered throws at every level. He can do all of those things. And if you throw on the tape, you're going to be impressed by his arm talent. I think that the thing that separates him and why he's such a good fit for Georgia is the way that he works. And he brought it up in Alan True's story for why he committed to Georgia, is saying, I'm wired the way, from an intensity standpoint, work ethic standpoint, mentality standpoint, the way that Georgia is wired. And I could not agree with that more. I mean, his coaches say it. He takes a business-like approach. His quarterback, his private trainer, Brad Mandler, said, you'll notice some adult-like qualities in Ryan Montgomery. He's not your typical high school junior until in terms of how he goes about his business. And his coaches even say that Ryan refers to getting in and doing film with them as the office. He wants it to be a day in the office. And that's really the approach that he takes. And I don't think you're going to find many guys that are going to work harder, watch more film, be in the building, and just generally care more about football than Ryan. I mean, I think I'll say this too. I mean, we've alluded to it. Like, I think Ryan understands that at certain points throughout this process, he wasn't a sure thing to be in Georgia's class, even though I think Georgia was the place that he always wanted to be. And I think for him, this today and committing to Georgia and being able to actually finalize that he's going to one of, if not the top programs in college football, is a culmination of a lot of hard work. I think that he feels like he really earned this opportunity to play for the University of Georgia. It did not come overnight. It did not happen easily. He even alluded to it on our 24/7 sports broadcast that there were ups and downs. There were roller coaster moments in his recruitment because he really just didn't know what it was going to be like. And I think he put in a lot of hours, a lot of time to get where he needed to be, to the point where Georgia really, really wanted him to be the quarterback in the class. And I think that's, pretty remarkable journey that he's been on.
I'm sure that business-like approach, that is music to Georgia fans' ears, because obviously he understands what he's getting into, and that there's going to be a lot of work ahead of him now as he's going to be a Georgia Bulldog. Kipp, tell us about what this means for Georgia, getting this situated at this point in the calendar, knowing that they've got their 2025 quarterback now in line to join the team. Just how big this was for Georgia to get this settled and to know that they've got their quarterback for the upcoming class.
Just to get this kind of quarterback means a lot for Georgia. I've just been thinking throughout the day of, the last time James Coley was on staff, he had the eval for Carson Beck. That was him saying, we need to take a closer look at this guy. This guy checks the boxes that we're looking for. He may not be the top guy in the country, but he's a guy that can come into our program and be competitive and help us win football games. And, I know that Coley's coming, he's back at Georgia as the wide receivers coach, but honestly, I got to just, when he's on staff, you got to feel good about just how the quarterback evals are going to be. I know that Montgomery, Van Gorder, Bobo, obviously with a lot of input on that, but the other quarterback Georgia went for in that cycle was CJ Stroud. And so I just, it's a good omen for Georgia to get a guy like that. And also just to get a guy with that mentality, just knowing that a month ago when he visited, he knew he wasn't the number one quarterback on the board. He knew, that they had not just, Juju Lewis, but, they were going after Matt Zollers, and he's still sitting there on a visit to Georgia, just knowing, he could not commit to Georgia then if he wanted to. There's still a mentality there that, you talk about business-like approach, but also just he's not worried about whether he, where he is on the board. That's not his problem. He knew he wanted to go to Georgia while he's on that visit, while he's not the number one guy on the board. He knows what he's looking for in a program. I think that approach is just really going to help Georgia out, as they try to just stack that quarterback room. We already know they have Jared Curtis on board for next cycle. That's a long way away in recruiting now. But to have a guy that is not worried about other quarterbacks and it has his business-like approach, is just highly competitive and is going to come in with that kind of attitude, along with being a pretty talented quarterback as well. That's exactly what you look for. And I go back to something we talk about a lot when we're doing these commit podcasts, and the fact he's a multi-sport athlete, the fact that he used to play baseball, the fact that he led Finley on he helped them have a playoff run in basketball. The fact that, he's a really talented golfer as well. Just all those different aspects tell me that he's just competitive in whatever he does. If we're going out there and playing pickleball, we all know that, Ryan Montgomery is going to smoke all of us because he's probably really good at pickleball. And I just think that that's exactly what you look for when you're looking for a quarterback. You look at the guys Georgia's had in the past, just their last two starting quarterbacks in Stetson Bennett and Carson Beck. They didn't come into Athens and just win the job, far from it. But yet they got, they both led Georgia on, some of the best statistical seasons, the best quarterback play that Georgia's ever had. And I think just that Carson Beck comparison, it matches up a lot. I think Carson might, throw the, maybe you have more velocity on a deep ball, but as Ben said, a guy who can, layer short, intermediate and throw his guys open. That's what you look for at the college level. You look at guys like Jordan Travis, you look at Jaden Daniels. I mean, that's similar arm talent. Those guys aren't throwing the ball 50 and 60 yards down the field all the time. They're throwing guys open. So I just think he has all, the attributes you look for in a Georgia quarterback, and the fact that he played in a highly complex offense already. I think Mike Bobo has to be really happy to the quarterback board that he did to be able to land a guy like Ryan Montgomery in this cycle.
I'll add to that too, Kipp, just bringing up the board and how they managed and navigated everything. I mean, I think there's been criticisms of Georgia in the past. I mean, you go back just 2 cycles to the Arch Manning recruitment, and it was very much an all eggs in one basket type of recruiting at the quarterback position. And I think that Georgia could not have done a better job of how they navigated it this cycle. I mean, they had 3 clear options. One of them had been committed to another place for a while. One of them was maybe a little bit more of a late riser that became on their radar a little bit later. And then another one was someone that they'd really known and trusted and communicated with the whole time. And so I think it gave them the ability to have real conversations with all of these quarterbacks and their families to get to the point where they're at today.
So, Ben, before we move on from quarterback, I feel like I got to bring this up because I think there's going to be the question of, okay, they got Ryan Montgomery. Is there still any chance they get Julian Lewis? Just, how do you see this playing out? Just as far as that last domino, obviously Julian's still a USC commit, but obviously big for Georgia getting Ryan Montgomery, sort of what that means as far as that pursuit.
Yeah, I wouldn't at this point. I would say Georgia was looking for one quarterback, and they're probably going to move forward with a 1 quarterback class. Like I said, he moved that official visit up to May 31st, which was the weekend that Julian Lewis had previously been scheduled to officially visit Georgia. We'll have more coverage at Dogs 24/7 about that as this moves, but I don't expect Julian to be on that visit anymore. I mean, I think that Georgia really went to both quarterbacks and kind of said, like, hey, we need to move forward. We need to have certainty in place of what we're going to do at the quarterback position. And Ryan was ready to go. And so because of that, Ryan's in the class. I think Ryan will be the guy that there's, sort of the face, I guess, if you will, of that May 31st weekend. And I think they'll have some receivers and other big time targets on campus that weekend as well. So that'll be a really big weekend as always.
Before we take a break, I just want to make sure if there are any parting thoughts. Kipp, anything else on Ryan Montgomery and what this means for Georgia?
Dave Dawson, brutal with the take as soon as he commits. He thinks that Ryan Montgomery is going to jump ship. That's a strong take from Dave Dawson. Let's let this guy sit on the commitment list for a little bit longer before we cast him aside. But I think you get a guy like this on board. I think the exact opposite. I think it's exactly the kind of quarterback commitment that can pay dividends for Georgia down the road. We talk about the transfer portal. We're about to talk about the transfer portal with Georgia, as they have, now, well over 20 guys in the transfer portal this cycle. The quarterback position is going to see movement. Georgia could add a quarterback in the transfer portal. I just think that Ryan Montgomery, as of right now, knowing that every quarterback wants to play, he's the kind of guy I think would come in and give Georgia multiple years of competing for snaps in Athens.
Ben, how about you? Any parting thoughts as far as Montgomery?
Yeah, really, I just think that this has been the question that we've had all spring is who is the quarterback going to be? And I think that, look, I've been on these before and said I thought Zollers was going to be in Georgia's class. I've been on here and I've said I thought Julian Lewis was going to be in Georgia's class. And I think it's one of those things we finally reached the end game of it, and it all makes sense. Like when you get to the end, a lot of times it just makes sense. And I think the guy that had wanted to go to Georgia for so long, that he finally got that opportunity. Again, like to Kipp's point around the comment about him jumping ship like an hour after he announced his commitment. I just think that if you can feel confidence in a recruit these days, this is the exact type that you can, because he's wanted this to be the result for so long. I mean, he had said that he was going to commit earlier in the spring. He said that he was maybe going to commit last year. He said that he was going to maybe commit, in March, and then it moved to April. And I think, let's be honest here, he was waiting for Georgia to say, you're our guy and we want you in the class. And I think the moment that was the opportunity, it was done. He was ready. He was in. And so I think that when it comes to confidence level of a guy not jumping ship, I mean, I can't think of anybody that you could paint a better picture of than Ryan Montgomery.
Take a quick break, come back, talk about G-Day, sort of wrap up what we saw at the scrimmage, talk about the transfer portal, and we'll close out talking a little UGA hoops. Well, guys, we did a pretty good job, I thought, wrapping up G-Day on Saturday, albeit with a good bit of wind hitting us there in Sanford Stadium. I want to give a shout out to anyone who listened to that, because I know that Mother Nature was not really our best friend in recording that. But I thought we did a very good job breaking down everything we saw. But I did want to make sure and take an opportunity to see if there was anything we didn't hit on or something that has stuck with you guys since that scrimmage. Really, the only thing that I would say that I don't feel like we talked a ton about, I thought Dan Jackson had a really good scrimmage. He was like one of the leading tacklers for his team. Thought he did a good job alongside Ja'Cory Thomas, I should say, as one of the safeties for the first team defense. So I thought that was really big. And, we bring him up. Every time I bring up Dan Jackson on the board, people have a meltdown and say, this guy's not really in it. And I think he very much is. I mean, I don't know if he'll wind up starting. I think Ja'Cory Thomas has done a very good job of putting himself in a position to start opposite Malachi Starks, but give Dan Jackson a lot of credit. I think that he's done a lot right, and I thought he had a really good scrimmage on Saturday. I'll start with you, Kipp. Was there anything that has sort of stuck with you since Saturday when it comes to that scrimmage, or if there's just anything we didn't talk about on Saturday that has really stood out to you?
Well, it's kind of the same opinion I had that day, but it's just kind of settled in that even more strongly as I go back and watch. It's not just the depth of wide receiver, but I just think the slot position at Georgia is the strongest it's ever been. Just knowing that Dominic Lovett seems to really be putting it all together. The light's coming on for him, picking up the offense now, knowing that Anthony Evans just seems poised for a breakout season. Seeing the usage from Michael Jackson in that scrimmage is kind of like, oh, okay, all right, this guy can make a couple plays. That was a really well played screen, and I mean, Bubba loves. The man's gonna love him some screens, and having a guy that can actually, get some yards after the catch on that. I'm sure he would love to see that happen. And I mean, Sokovia White, goodness, he's just proven. I think he's proven us right, just specifically on this podcast. But maybe the those rankings might look similar, down the road to Lab McConkey. It's just that right there is just a really, really, really talented group, and just knowing that Dylan Bell and Arian Smith can probably rotate in there. They have the skill sets to play there as well. So I just think that right there, I mean, just seeing that performance, I think that you're going to see a lot more, at least 3 wideout sets this season than maybe ever before for Georgia.
Facebook, Michael Ward said that Michael Jackson's touchdown celebration may be the moonwalk. Well, Michael, I got good news. If you've seen any of his highlights from USC, he has in fact done the moonwalk, which, I mean, you kind of have to if your name is Michael Jackson. Ben, does anything really still stick with you from G-Day that maybe we haven't discussed? Anything that is kind of top of your mind when you look back at the scrimmage?
Yeah, not really anything we haven't discussed necessarily. I mean, when I went back and watched it, and we talked about this post game, but I came away really impressed by the defense. I felt like aside from, Dom Lovett, who I'll talk about here in a second, like I feel like they kind of won the day across the board, except for that kind of final drive or so. But I think that they heard some of the conversation around the offensive line and the defensive line. And I think that some of those edge rushers, Chaz Chambliss, Damon Wilson, Samuel Mpemba, like there's a chance for them to take the next step this year. And I think that everybody's waiting on that just to be able to generate a little bit more pass rush. And I think there were situations where that certainly happened on last Saturday, even though it was in a simulated environment. But I will bring up Dom Lovett, and it's not a news flash to say that he's a really good player, that Georgia is going to feature him in the offense because they got him a lot of touches last year. But I think when you start to look at who does Georgia replace Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers receiving yards with, I think that Dom Lovett is poised to have a really, really big year. I think the year that maybe some of us thought that he would have statistically last year, he is in position to have that kind of statistical output this year. I mean, as we know, Georgia uses Dom Lovett a lot in that extension of the run game type of play. I think they're still going to use him a lot there, but I also think you're going to see him get involved a lot more in the intermediate passing game. And I think that he flexed that a little bit last Saturday.
Yeah, I think Dom Lovett's got a chance to have a really big season. I wrote about this really in line with what you were just saying, Ben. In my rewatch story, I said I think he's going to be Georgia's leading receiver. I think he's got a chance to have a really productive season and be a big piece of this passing offense. Like you said, after you lose guys like Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers, Marcus Rosemy-Jackson, you need people to step up. I think Dom Lovett is one of those guys. Ben, talking about G-Day, obviously there were a ton of recruits in town for that game. Tell us a little bit about what you've heard in the days since, just about that experience for some of those guys, and if there's any names to kind of keep an eye on from those who visited.
Well, as we talked about after G-Day and the Darren Nickenigban committing to Georgia, I mean, that was the big news out of the weekend. But I think the vibe in general coming out of Athens following that weekend was you're probably going to see a lot of names that were on that visit list in Georgia's 2025 signing class. I think that it was a successful weekend. I think you look at guys like Travis Smith Jr. at wide receiver, Dijon Lee at defensive back. I mean, there were guys that Georgia has been trending well for a while that I think they only did themselves favors this past weekend. I think timing of everything is a little less certain. When would they come into the fold? I think that's really the task that I have now, is to sort of figure out when some of these things are going to happen. But I think that it was a really successful weekend on that front. I think the name that everybody's going to be asking about is Justice Terry, the defensive lineman that flipped from Georgia to Southern Cal. And, I bring up Darren Nickenigban at the beginning because he committed to Chidera Uzo-Diribe on Friday night. They went out on it, sort of hung out with Glenn Schumann, Trey Scott, Coach Diribe. They were having a really good time. Justice Terry was with them as well. And I think that I think it matters that Darren Nickenigban, the guy that commits that weekend, and Justice Terry, those are the two prospects that they kind of wanted together, mingling, hanging around as potential being the future of Georgia's front seven. And, I think that Georgia made waves with Justice Terry. I think they are in the process of making up some ground. The communication has been constant between Trey Scott and Glenn Schumann and Kirby Smart and Justice Terry ever since he committed to USC. I think getting him back on campus this past weekend was really important for helping him remember why he chose Georgia in the first place. I could end up being wrong about this one, but I do think this is a recruitment that doesn't just happen overnight. It doesn't just change back to he's a Georgia commit. I think Georgia understands that they're going to recruit other defensive linemen, knowing that if at a certain point Justice Terry wants to flip back to Georgia later on in the cycle, or even maybe toward the end of the cycle, he's going to have the open opportunity to do so. They're never going to take away that spot for him. And I think that similar conversation could be had about Isaiah Gibson, the edge from Warner Robins, who also chose USC over Georgia last month. I think that there's similar communication and things like that. Now, he was not on campus this past weekend, but I just think that their recruitments can be talked about similarly in terms of how Georgia is approaching it. And, I guess while we're just talking about G-Day recruits, I mean, it was a big weekend for the 2026 class as well. We've talked a lot about Ryan Montgomery during this podcast. Well, 2026 quarterback Jared Curtis was back for his first time since committing earlier in the spring, and he was helping with a lot of the other 2026 prospects that were on campus, and Georgia certainly had a bunch of them as well, including Texas running back commit Racing Guillory, who is and considering the Bulldogs right now, I think they certainly made up some ground on Texas, though he obviously remains firmly committed to the Longhorns at this time.
Thought that was worthwhile to hear a little bit about Justice Terry, because one, that's one of those recruitments that feels like it has not been totally locked up and a done deal. But I think about Kirby Smart when he's talked about in recent weeks and months about recruiting KJ Bolden. He was like, look, a verbal commitment's not much. It's not, they haven't signed anywhere, so we're going to keep on recruiting them. And you can imagine that Kirby is going to do that when it comes to Justice Terry. Well, guys, let's talk about the transfer portal. It officially opened on Tuesday. As we are recording this on Wednesday afternoon, 3 Georgia players have announced their intentions to enter the portal. That would be running back Andrew Paul, wide receiver Tyler Williams, and walk-on wide receiver Braxton Hicks. I would say that, so far, I don't think the impact has been all that bad for Georgia. I think Andrew Paul is a guy that, I expected to stick around and play a decent bit. He had 4 carries at G-Day. I thought he could sort of be in that rotation, but I think he decided he wanted to look around and maybe get a bigger role somewhere else, and we'll keep an eye on where he ends up. But, Kipp, what do you think so far about what Georgia has lost from the portal? And if you think that they're going to go after a position or a few positions, what are you looking for?
Well, I mean, everyone kind of says they weren't surprised with Andrew Paul leaving, Georgia being, still having, 7 running backs on scholarship. But, I kind of look at it differently. Right now, I think if we're going to assume that Trevor Etienne is suspended for at least 1 game, and then further assume, I know it's dangerous, but that game could be the season opener. And then the number 2 running back for Georgia right now could be Chauncey Bowens, Cash Jones. I mean, Nate Frazier isn't there yet, but obviously he's going to push for playing time. Freshman running backs at Georgia have been, they've obviously had huge roles, but at the same time, I think Kirby Smart probably just sees it a little differently. I don't think he wants to have right now to know he's going in there with potentially a backup running back who's never taken a college snap. And so, if they see a running back that they like, I think that's definitely something that they would look at. And just keeping in line with the, the overall theme of the podcast, I also feel the same way about the quarterback position. I think, again, Carson Beck, obviously, he could be the best quarterback in the country this fall. And, a lot of people think that, that's kind of where he is in terms of coming back from last season and the overall talent. But I think not just looking ahead to this season, but, next spring, I don't think that Kirby Smart wants to go into next spring with, just Gunnar Stockton, Ryan Puglisi, and Ryan Montgomery. I think he would want somebody who, preferably is played some college snaps and, it maybe started at a, an FBS level or, at a Power 5 program. If one is available, I think he'll try to go, after it. I think right now, I don't think anyone's entered the portal right now that Georgia's going to be taking a super strong look at. You would assume they already have evaluated everyone that's in the portal. I just think as it stands right now, there isn't really anyone I would think would be on Georgia's radar, someone they're trying to land. And that kind of bears true with the fact that as of right now, there's not really any visit plans for Georgia with any of these guys in the transfer portal overall. So it still has to be the right guy. They're right around that 85 scholarship limit. And I think the biggest thing for Georgia right now is actually just getting through the rest of this portal window with everyone on the roster. Because I think the best possible players for Georgia are already in Athens. And so we have, another week and a half to go of Georgia trying to just fend off guys leaving. That's the biggest thing right now, because I think Georgia probably has, the best, if not a top 2 or 3 roster in college football right now.
I think Kip hit the nail on the head that, Georgia is better off just trying to keep as many as they can and not necessarily going out and trying to add more people. And, just anecdotally thinking about these last few years, I swear that it's like we get into the spring portal and we just have, a general list of like 8 or 9 guys that were like, they could portal. And then you get through that spring window for Georgia and it's like, maybe half of that list did, maybe even less. Like Georgia does a pretty good job of retention. So, again, we're just about a day into the portal being open, but so far I think that they would be okay. I think you're right too that, he would have preferred for Andrew Paul to stay, but if that's your biggest loss, I mean, I think Georgia's sitting pretty compared to some teams. Ben, what are your thoughts so far just on what this portal window has looked like, what Georgia's lost, and what they might decide to go after?
Well, I think Andrew Paul is going to be the name that people will probably bring up the most because I thought with his 4 carries that he got on Saturday, he made some good film for himself for the transfer portal out of it as well, because I thought that he honestly ran really hard. I mean, I thought that he looked pretty good. And I think we've all been waiting to see him kind of emerge from the prospect that we thought that he was going to become before his ACL injury. And so I'm interested to see where he goes and sort of what level of college football he ends up landing at, because I think he can definitely help somebody. Aside from that, I think, Tyler Williams entering the portal, I don't think is a huge surprise to anybody, but another one where, sometimes it's just the way that it goes. You do your evaluations in the out of high school. There's guys with a lot of promise that project well, that have a lot of upside, and sometimes it just doesn't always work out, and they're better off somewhere else too. So in terms of the guys leaving, not really any huge surprises, but definitely a couple names that mattered during their high school recruitments. And to Kip's point, I think when it comes to Georgia bringing anybody in, it's got to be the right person. If you're building your roster in December through that transfer portal, in many cases, people are fully building their roster. In Georgia's case, just parts of their roster. But this period, I think, is really, you've come out of spring. Maybe you've lost a guy or two that you weren't expecting to the portal. And so you need to backfill and you need to kind of just get your roster right. But in most cases, Georgia, the depth that it has, the caliber of talent that Georgia has, they're not going to be using the spring portal a whole lot, because chances are there's not going to be that many guys transferring after their spring season that are of the caliber of player that Georgia looks for to add to their roster. And so a couple of those names might come up here or there. And obviously the quarterback position is the one that I think everybody's going to want to see who fits into that role. I think that maybe the December quarterback portal could become a little bit more interesting if the names don't emerge the way that they're expecting them to this spring.
Yeah, it's sort of a wait and see, it seems like, on quarterback, because like Kip pointed out, there hasn't been a name that I've seen going in so far that you go, oh, that's an obvious Georgia connection. I mean, you might see them go after somebody much like they did Jaden Mayava back in the winter, where I don't think there was a natural like, oh, well, they're going to look at this UNLV guy. But, we'll wait and see, and we'll obviously follow it in the days and weeks to come. All right, Georgia men's basketball minute before we get out of here. Got to say, I should have brought this up on Saturday during the G-Day podcast. Silas Demery Jr. is coming back. I thought that was a huge announcement for Georgia. The point guard is coming back for his sophomore season. I really think that was sort of back and forth over these last few weeks as he tried to decide what he was going to do. As of right now, it looks like all 3 of the remaining freshmen are going to be back. That's Silas Demery Jr., Blue Kane, and Dylan James. To have those back, and then as of right now, they have 5 guys on the roster with Frank Anselm, eBay, and RJ Melendez as well. We'll see if that's what this roster looks like. There's been a lot of talk just generally around college basketball that, hey, there might be some more portal entrants in the next few days, few weeks, kind of like NIL deals ending up, coming to their end and guys deciding to go in once those are done. So can never say never, but really right now Georgia is in full portal mode. They had Ryan Montgomery, a Mount St. Mary's guard who played really, really well against Georgia in December. He visited on Monday and Tuesday. Sounds like that went well. Not sure how soon a decision is going to come there. And then they had Justin Abson, a forward from Appalachian State, the Sun Belt Defensive Player of the Year. He visited over the weekend for G-Day. It seems like that went well, but Justin still got a little bit to go before he decides what he's going to do. So seems like things are trending in the right direction, but Georgia's got 7 or 8 open scholarships. They have got to fill those. And there's a lot of interesting targets out there, but guys, there are a lot of teams that are trying to fill some needs through the transfer portal. All right, we are going to wrap up the episode right there. I appreciate Kipp and Ben for coming on. I appreciate everyone who watched this live pretty much right after Ryan Montgomery's announcement, and everyone who's listening to this after the fact. Be sure to go to dogs247.com. If you are listening on Wednesday, our 60% off sale is still going on. It's going to end at 11:59 p.m. Eastern time tonight. So make sure you jump on that. Also go to Dogs247 on YouTube. Subscribe there. You'll have all kinds of podcast episodes. You've got all the interviews from Kirby Smart and players through the spring. You're going to have to watch those over these next few weeks and months as we get really going into the off season. But excited for what we got cooking on the podcast. Got a lot of fun stuff lined up to get us through another busy off season. So we will wrap it up right there. For Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.